All right. So last time we took a look at the editor and got familiar with what everything means in our editor. And now we can actually modify our scene and make some things now. So let's first start by making a floor. And, well, you see, this is the cube that we made last time, right? I'm going to go ahead and turn on lighting again. I'm going to move the game back here so we can see our scene is bigger. And I'm going to go ahead and, in fact, you can just click on it in your scene. If you just click on that, you'll see it's automatically highlighted in your hierarchy. And you can just press delete, and that will remove anything that you don't want. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click here. I'm going to say create empty. And now I just have an empty game object. And every game object that you have always will have a transform component. And the transform component is the spatial representation of where it is in our world. So we see how we have a position here. Unity makes it sometimes at random and sometimes where we have some kind of point of view. So what you can do here on our transform, instead of just moving it around, you can actually just click on it, press 0, tab 0, tab 0, and now it is in the very center of our massive world. It's at 0, 0, 0, the origin point of our world. And for this game object, we know we have something there. And what we're gonna do is that I'm just gonna rename this. If you right click on that, rename it, I'm gonna call this the floor, right? Now this is gonna act as our parent game object. You can actually, if you right click on floor here, if I right click this, you can see create empty, 3D object, 2D object. If I go to 3D object, I click cube, you see that floor is actually the parent of cube. I can move floor around. If I click on floor and move it around, it actually moves cube along with it. So that's another way you can group objects together. I just have an empty game object where I'm storing all our things that are count as our floor. And just right now, it's just this cube. Now this cube, I'm going to increase its scale. Make this 10, 10. The Y can stay 1. 10, 10 for X and Z. So now that we have it 10, 10, we have a nice solid floor that we have here. What I'm going to do now too is that we'll make a little like entrance way. So I'm going to go ahead, create. Actually, I'll show off how you can just create all the things in a cube by itself. So in the floor, I'm going to click create empty. And in our cube, you see all these components here, right? Cube, you have a mesh filter, a mesh renderer, a box collider, and material for it. So I can actually add all those components in. So at first we got the mesh filter, mesh render, a box collider, and then finally the material. So for that, in our mesh, we see we have none here in this mesh filter area. If we look in our cube, mesh is cube. So what we can do is that this little like sphere with the dot inside, if we click that, will send us everything in our Unity project that has the mesh component. So we can click cube. Let's move this up. And we can see it renders out a mesh. Now it is pink because currently there is no material in there. So if I change this, you see in mesh render, materials, we have element 0, there's nothing in there. But if we click that, we press our default material, right? One of these. And you see Unity has a lot of different materials that you can use. But we're just gonna click this one here. And now we basically just created a cube. We use a slightly different material, but that's fine. I mean, we can change that again, make it do that. And we basically just created a cube from scratch. We changed its Y component a bit and its scale, and scale is the same, but yeah. All these things, when you go here into 3D object, it's basically just pre-made components, pre-made objects that you can make yourself if you really want to. And that's kind of powerful because Unity is a component-based system that you can just add things as you want to a game object and it'll have that property added to it. So one thing to mention here is that I'm going to go ahead and put this here. If you hold V on your keyboard, you see that as I press it, and move around, it actually snaps to one of the corners. So I can snap to a corner, click this, right? And it will automatically snap to the other corners on my other cube. It's a good way if you just want to place it, your corner here, to another corner and make it perfectly ajar. That's how you would want to do that. Well, let's make this, let me press my T key. I'm just going to elongate that a bit. You can see it automatically changes the scale here and changes the position automatically at center point. So we got like a flag kind of thing. So I'm actually going to move this near the center here. So I'll zero out the Z. So we got a cube and like a kind of like a walkway leading up to it. This can be kind of like the starting area that we walk up into our main location. So we can do something like that in Unity. It's pretty cool. But we see here box colliders. Now, in games like this, collision and colliders, box colliders means that this thing here counts as an object that you can't just walk into. It has this space. It has this space that it encompasses, right? And we consider that a collision. Like if we have gravity in our game and an object is falling onto our area here, it won't continue further. It'll stop there because that counts as a solid plane, solid location. If you don't have a box collider, like if I uncheck this, you see the green lines, they kind of go away, or like they get dim, letting you know that this isn't active. So if I have a ball and it goes through, then it won't count as anything. So there's actually no gravity affecting these components right now. If I click play, let me switch to our game. Yeah. So if I click play here, we can't move anything around. This is just the camera, but this is showing me what the camera looks. And you can see these guys aren't falling down at all. But that's because they don't have a component called the rigid body component. What I'm going to do is that over here I'm going to create a sphere. Create a sphere. We'll zero it out. Move it up. And it's up there. If we see it in the game, yeah, we can see it's right there. And it has the same mesh renderer, mesh filter, and it has the sphere filter this time around, and it has a sphere collider. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to click add component, and I'm going to look up a rigid body. A rigid body basically means that this thing is allowed to have forces act upon it. And we see here it says use gravity. Yes, it has a mass, it has a drag, angular drag. Is kinematic basically means like if it can be moved or not. We want to keep that unchecked. And you can check all these different constraints and stuff. If you want to be able to say like this sphere is not allowed to move in a certain direction or rotate in a certain direction, you can do that. And that's going to come in handy once we make our player character in another video. But because we added this rigid body, if I click play now, it falls down and it stops at our collider. Now, if I go to this cube here and I click is trigger, this basically means that this collider here can detect something in it, but it won't act as solid. So you'll see the sphere go completely down, pass through it. So if we go back to our scene, you can see it falling down all the way. Let's stop that. Okay. So I'm going to show you why we want to keep game and scene separate. So that way in our scene, we can see what happens there, but in our scene, we can see what actually happens while the game is there. It's useful to have for debugging kind of ways. And then what's funny is that actually, so our cube right now is this trigger. If I click play and then pause immediately, so the game is currently paused. Nothing's happening right now. In our cube here, we have this is trigger to set to true. I uncheck it. It stops. Check it again. It goes through. So you can actually edit things on the fly in Unity while in play mode. But changes you make in play mode, this is important. So I'm going to repeat this. Any changes that you make while in play mode are not saved. Once I click out of play mode, let me do this here. So let me uncheck as a trigger, right? If I go back to play, it's automatically reset. That change that I made is not saved. That is important. So I don't want this to be a trigger anymore. I want that to be solid. So we have a sphere that can go down. We have our main area here, and things are looking good so far. we have a lot of things to consider. And remember, transform is a part of every single game object here. I'm gonna rename these. I'm gonna call this one ball. This instead is gonna be called main floor. I'll call this one entrance floor. Name doesn't really matter, except for a few scripting things where you maybe want to check an object by its name. And it's mainly for you to organize what things are. That's good to consider. So we have this scene so far. We have our collider set up and stuff like that. And that's all I really wanted to look at in this video. We can actually, since now we can actually create things in our game world, and we can see things actually happening once we click play. And that's good. That's good for right now. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at actually creating a player, looking at a few things, actually changing things in our environment. We're going to be setting up some more complex stuff and actually change stuff in our scene. So look forward to that. See you guys next time.